Good evening. My name is Wayne Patcham. I'm the president with the Steinbach Chamber of Commerce, and on behalf of the Steinbach Chamber, we are happy to welcome you to our candidates forum for the 2021 federal election. I would like to start by saying that this event acknowledges that we are gathered on Treaty 1 territory, traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the ancestral and traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. In addition, I would like to thank Golden West for partnering with us and bringing this event to the community. It is an important event for us as voters to hear the platforms and the positions of the parties that are seeking candidacy for leadership in our riding. And I would like to thank the candidates this evening for two things. For one, for being willing to take public office and represent our communities, and two, for giving your time this evening to our community to talk about your platforms and answer the questions that our constituents have for you this evening. So I'd also like to thank our community members tuning in via the live stream for taking the time out of your evening to engage in our democratic process and to carefully consider the parties that are before us this evening as we look at electing the next leaders of our country. It's a very important privilege that we have as Canadians, and we're glad that you've taken the time to give that a responsible choice and hearing what they have to say. So now I'd like to turn it over to our moderator and host for the evening, Shannon Duick. Shannon, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Yeah, for this evening's election forum, we'll begin with opening statements, followed by our question and answer period, and then closing statements. For the opening statements, each candidate will be allowed a maximum of 2 minutes. There was a random draw done just a short while ago to determine the order for opening statements, and then we'll use the reverse order for closing statements. So we'll begin with opening statements in the following order: Independent Rick Loewen, followed by Liberal candidate Trevor Kirczenow, then Green Party candidate Janine Gibson, and finally People's Party of Canada candidate Noel Gautron. Rick, if you want to start us off with opening statements, please.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, thanks for having me. I am Rick Loewen. I'm running as an independent here in Provencher. It's my first go at politics. I was going to say on the campaign trail, I like to say I wasn't so much knocking on doors as knocking on hearts. But when I was in and around the community on the golf course, it's kind of two themes that I heard. One was that people were going to just sort of hold their nose and vote for somebody. And the other thing was that they were going to do a protest vote so that they kind of would take the candidates. I believe there are 6 of us. 2 of them are not here tonight. They were going to take them and do a process of elimination. And I thought, well, that's kind of a pathetic way to vote. And I thought it'd be nice if someone could actually vote for somebody. So I would like to think that nobody's going to hold their nose if they vote for me. They may not vote for me, which is fine. But I don't think you'll find that you'll have to hold your nose if you vote for me, because I'm not at all bogged down by any kind of party. I'm not weighed down by a party's ideologies. We all know that nobody wanted an election, but here we are in the middle of a pandemic having one. So we have to exercise our right, and I hope we all do. I really, my wife and I have 2 foster boys, so I'm really focused in on Indigenous issues. I know a lot of these things we'll cover later. Just to give you a brief outline. Also, climate change is very important to me, stewardship of the earth, and the LGBTQ plus community. And I know there's more letters and more numbers in there. Also very important to me. Want to be very inclusive in that too. So I think there's a real gap in Provencher where people who are maybe fiscally conservative but are more socially progressive, and there doesn't seem to be maybe a candidate in there now. So I hope I can sort of slide in that way. So anyway, thank you for having me on this on the debate tonight, certainly, and thanks for allowing me to be a candidate in Provencher.
Thank you, Rick. Now, Trevor.
Hi, everybody. I'm Trevor Kirczenow, your Liberal candidate for Provencher. First, I just want to thank the organizers of this event. Thank you for putting this together and hosting it. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in and listening right now. I appreciate your time very much. So I'll say a little bit about my own background. I'm 36 years old. I live on a small farm near the town of Dugald with my husband and our 2 kids. and we raise turkeys, chickens, goats, and Ojibwe horses. The Ojibwe horse is a critically rare breed and Canada's only Indigenous developed horse breed. I have a background in health research. As a community member, I led a research project funded by the Canadian Institutes for Health Research, where we looked at the experiences of transgender people with building their families. I also have been very involved in a grassroots diabetes advocacy campaign in the past year, where we've been working with the province to improve pharmacare coverage. And there was an exciting announcement about that just the other day. So I'm very proud of having been involved in that work. I believe strongly in public health. It's very important to me. I have been fully vaccinated against COVID-19, and I would encourage everyone watching this right now to do so as well if you are able to. If you're at all unsure about it, please talk to your healthcare provider about this. I also feel very passionately about addressing climate change and protecting the environment, and that's one thing I've been hearing about repeatedly from constituents when I've been out knocking doors. I think that's a common concern in Provencher riding. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Trevor. Now, Janine. Janine, I think you might be muted.
Oh, yes, I was. Thank you. Thank you for your attention this evening, both other candidates and those who have joined us from the community. I'd like to also thank the organizers for your efforts for this evening. I think it's very important for democracy for us to present our platforms. And to that end, I'll be speaking largely from Platform 21, Be Daring, the Green Party platform. I have worked in organic agriculture for the past 30 years. Having been raised on a farm, my grandpa didn't call himself an organic farmer, neither did my grandma call herself an organic gardener, but they were. And I was extremely healthy being raised on that good food. So I'm pleased to have spent a career helping farmers get off the chemicals and find better ways to build their soil, because I've always been involved in agriculture and happy to work supporting a more resilient organic agriculture in Provencher. To that end, I'll be speaking to our platform and encouraging people, if you want to read more about our platform, to go to greenpartyprovencher.ca and join the discussion that we're having there. There'll be also a link to the platform that I'll be referencing as I speak. We have three basic pillars in our platform: a green future, transitioning to a green future, life with dignity, and a just society. And we believe those are all work together, that there's no peace without justice. But the Green Party not only is known for being fiscally conservative and socially progressive, but also collegial and wanting to work across party lines for the kinds of changes and solutions that we need in Provencher and across Canada today. We need to look at how we can transition to a green economy while we're ensuring that we're practicing environmental justice. We want to look at innovation in agricultural and food. We want to look at revitalizing municipal affairs. We want to look at introducing guaranteed annual incomes so that we can deal with poverty in this society once and for all. That will be a great reduction in both crime and in drains on our healthcare system. So I'm not seeing any signs yet, but I'm thinking I must be getting close to my time. I thought we were going to have a visual cue.
You have 10 more seconds, Janine.
Oh, well, just thank you all for being here, and I look forward to encouraging you to think green and vote Janine.
Thank you very much, Janine. And now Noel.
Yeah, I would also like to thank the hosts and ultimately introduce myself a little bit. I'm Noel Gautron. I'm your candidate for the People's Party of Canada. A lot of people on the campaign trail have been asking me why I decided to get involved. Ultimately, it was something of a dissatisfaction with the larger conservative movement. I noticed over time a lot of platitudes that typically I didn't find very satisfying. I find myself being something of a straightforward individual, speak truth, and I think generally people can get along fairly well. Yeah. So with that, I'll hand it back to Mr. Dewick.
Thank you, Noel. We'll now move to the question and answer period of tonight's forum. Candidates will be keeping their answers to 1 minute and 40 seconds. Candidates will be notified when there are 10 seconds remaining, and then again when their time is up. So we'll be using the same random order that we use for opening statements. However, we'll rotate who gets first and then last answers. The Chamber of Commerce has asked me to remind candidates that they're expected to cooperate, respect others, and not speak out of turn or over each other. Also, the candidates have not been given these questions in advance and are answering in real time. Let's begin with the first question. What is your position on how best to deal with global warming? What is your position on the current federal carbon tax program? Trevor, we'll start with you.
So I think that climate change is something that we are grappling with every day, especially in this riding. It's become absolutely impossible to ignore. And I'm very concerned that the Conservative Party membership recently voted against acknowledging that climate change is real. I don't see how we can address such a huge problem if we cannot all agree that it is real. And I understand that the PPC holds a similar position. Aaron O'Toole has included a plan for the environment in the Conservative Party platform, but again, I just don't find that plausible. The Liberal Party has a number of really important programs in place already, and I would love to see those continue. We've got the Green Homes program to help homeowners make their homes more energy efficient and support them in doing that. We have the Agricultural Climate Change Solutions program and the Agricultural Green Technology program as well. And those programs have both a research stream, and collecting data on what's actually happening is vitally important for how we move forward in addressing and coping with climate change. And then those programs also have a funding stream which provides direct funding support to farmers who are right now dealing with the effects of these climate extremes. We recently improved agri-stability after it had been cut under Stephen Harper. And I really want to see that program be able to continue and stay strong. As for the carbon tax, I feel that's also incredibly important. It just came in 2019. So right now, in terms of the data, we haven't yet been able to see a huge effect from it, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And we don't have data for the year 2020 yet. But I really believe that program is the right way to go, and we must continue on with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Now, Janine.
Thank you. The Green Party believes that we will introduce green regulations to introduce a carbon border adjustment, which we think is very important. A carbon border adjustment, a CBA, could well be the single most impactful action Canada could take to encourage other countries to adopt strong emissions reduction policies. So in this fight against the climate emergency, Canadians should always be seeking to show leadership in international efforts to reduce global GHG emissions. So not only would a carbon border adjustment ensure Canadian companies paying carbon tax are not placed at a competitive disadvantage with foreign companies located in other countries with no such taxes. So this carbon border adjustment, we think, is a very important aspect, and that we need to continuously reevaluate the impact of the carbon border adjustment on developing countries through a lens of global environmental justice as we gradually increase the carbon taxes beginning in 2022 here in Canada. And we can't do that without supporting jobs and a green transition. So as the polluter pay policies get put into practice, we need to ensure that we have the social safety network that that supports small business and supports a transition to the expenses of a carbon tax, while providing supports in other areas that can neutralize the negative effects of the tax. We also believe that it's very important to improve waste management and circularity. So that is reduce consumption waste and planned obsolescence, promote green procurement practices, promote sustainable waste management practices such as waste treatment, more recycling, and a safe handling of healthcare and biochemical waste. We think we should proceed with regulations to ban non-essential single-use plastic.
Thank you, Janine. Noel?
Yeah, thank you. So with the People's Party of Canada, part of our, not so much part of our environmental policy, but as our my Liberal colleague just announced there, we indeed are planning to remove the carbon tax. We at the People's Party believe that we need more direct action. So this would take the form of protecting our lakes and rivers, additional measures, perhaps in forms of single-use plastics. I could go further on this measure, but strictly speaking, the carbon tax we find to be counterintuitive, as it will ultimately be forcing people onto a technology that has a shorter service life. Back to you, Mr. Dewitt.
Thank you, Noel. And now you, Rick.
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, the Liberals had the Paris Accord, and they had these targets they wanted to meet. And of course, in the last few years since there, we've actually gone up. The emissions have gone up. And instead of saying we'll try harder, they said, well, we're going to make the targets even more unreachable. I mean, the one thing, talking to people, and then the Conservatives want to go to the Paris Accord targets. Everyone I talk, nobody believes that anyone is ever going to reach these targets. I mean, it's so ridiculous that anyone even talks about them. What we need to do is try to achieve, I think, incrementally. We need to create a culture of awareness, stewardship for the earth. I mean, it's like, when I was a kid, nobody wore seatbelts, and then they brought in seatbelts, and everyone went, oh, we can't do that, and now nobody thinks about it. I think there has to be an organic, pardon the pun, but an organic, incremental way of teaching people to just be a little bit more, friendly to the climate. And in Provencher, we're not a big city. We don't have any big cities, so we're not really responsible for a lot of the emissions. So it's a little bit counterintuitive for us here in Provencher to think of those kinds of things. But I think what we just need to do is, and then just specifically about pipelines. I mean, again, it's unrealistic that anyone would think that we're not going to need oil. We need oil. That's the way it is. We got to pick. Are we doing pipelines? Are we doing trains? Are we doing trucks? We've got to figure out a way to do it. There's going to be oil spills. There's going to be things that happen. We got to figure out maybe have electric trains. Maybe use battery-powered trains and trucks to transport the oil, and at least you have a little bit of a counterbalance there. But nobody believes we're going to reach the targets now, so let's make them more realistic.
Thank you, Rick. Our next question: how is the best way to promote and encourage young entrepreneurs in today's economy? For this question, we'll start with Janine.
Thank you. I do think entrepreneurship is extremely important. I've been a self-employed businesswoman for over 30 years now, and I think we need to look at supporting small business and supporting young ones and getting involved in entrepreneurship. For this, I think it would be very helpful if we implemented striking all student debt. We can easily move to that by reducing the billions and billions of subsidies that go to the oil sector to support education. And so the Green Party believes in free education to all, and it's very important to do your planning, to know how to do a business plan, to set up business. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy in Provencher and elsewhere. And so we believe reducing stress on students, making sure that all students have the CSB supports that are retroactively put in place until the end of the pandemic, that we also increase the grants for post-secondary doctorates and PhDs so that we continue to retain the intelligence of our youth and where they can study to put their businesses into practice. We also want to reduce tax on the small businesses while increasing tax on the larger corporations as we shift away from the extractive industrial model of capitalism to one that's based more on social justice and environmental justice, where we're respected as part of the ecosystem. So as we shift and transition to a greener future, we need to subsidize the workers transitioning from the old economies.
Thank you, Janine. Noel?
Yeah, so with the People's Party, we believe that reduced taxation and reduced regulatory burden would ultimately spur the economy forward. I should note, however, that there will be some delay in implementing major tax reforms simply because of our mounting debt and deficits. Back to you, Mr. Dewitt.
Thank you, Noel. Rick?
Yeah, thanks. I think as far as the economy and entrepreneurs, of course, everyone wants that. It's sort of a catch-22 question, or a bit of a gotcha question. I mean, it's there are actually lots of programs in place, I'll be honest with you, for young entrepreneurs to succeed. I like the idea of maybe not canceling, but reducing student debt. I think that's really important. But I have this idea, where like every community, and I can't remember. I know, Trevor, you said you were Dougaled. I can't remember exactly where everyone else from. Every community has sort of a community leader, one or two people that kind of know what's going on. I think there's a real opportunity for the federal government to sort of reach into those communities, to those people, and say, look, what do you guys need? Who's doing what in the community, right? Because nobody minds paying taxes. Nobody minds. Let me clarify. Nobody minds paying taxes if the tax money is used wisely. I think there's a real opportunity for communities as a whole to identify their leaders, their young entrepreneurs, and say, hey, these guys are doing a really good job. The community gets behind it. Maybe there's a matching grant or something like that. But to not have boots on the ground, to just blindly throw money, we all know that enormous waste that governments, the money that they waste is unbelievably incredible. And so if they would just kind of tap into the communities themselves and find out what the community members are doing and who the people are that they should be supporting, I think there's a real opportunity there.
Thank you, Rick. And now you, Trevor.
Yeah, so I think the number one step for supporting people involved in business and young entrepreneurs right now is to address COVID at the moment. We all know how much many of us have struggled during the course of the pandemic through restrictions and lockdowns that have been needed in order to protect our health system. I think the programs that we've had in place they prevented many businesses and individuals from going under completely. They've been absolutely necessary. I've spoken with people in many different industries, including tourism and entertainment, restaurant businesses, that those support programs were absolutely crucial for many folks. And now the best thing that we can do to protect our economy, to protect our businesses, is for all of us, as much as possible, to get fully vaccinated against COVID. We cannot afford to have a devastating fourth wave that will cause us to have restrictions once again in order to prevent our health system from collapsing. So that's incredibly important to think of. I agree with Janine and Rick that also supporting students is really important to helping young entrepreneurs. The Liberal Party waived interest on Canada student loans and Canada apprentice loans for 2 years during the pandemic. We understand that young people were the hardest hit by job losses as a result of the pandemic. And
Trevor, time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Our next question. Over the recent past, we've heard a lot of my body, my choice. Please express you or your party's position on this topic, both where it pertains to vaccinations and abortions. And for this question, we'll start with Noel.
Thank you. So at the People's Party of Canada, with regard to vaccine mandates, vaccine passports, as well as the lockdowns and the plethora of other restrictions both the federal and provincial governments have placed on us as citizens, we find these utterly unconstitutional. We will not back down from opposing these measures. These are not something that we can reasonably let stand. And ultimately, I think we're going to have a great deal of success in getting rid of these restrictions. On the note of abortion, the party doesn't have any official policy. It is set up in such a manner that individual candidates are representing best how their constituents view the topic. I myself, I'm a pro-life candidate and a proponent that life begins at conception. Back to you, Mr. Dewitt.
Thank you, Noel. Now you, Rick.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, absolutely. You know, it's funny that out of the 6 candidates, 4 of us believe in science and 2 don't. It boggles my mind. I just heard Noel talking, and he wouldn't be here if he didn't have the MMR, or the polio, or the whooping. I noticed he wasn't coughing, so I don't think he has whooping cough. But for some reason, this vaccine has been politicized. I don't understand it. It makes no sense to me. I have a feeling that if you told the PPC that they couldn't get vaxxed, they would say, well, now we're going to get vaxxed. I mean, it just seems whatever you say to them, they're going to do something else. I don't understand how, if you'd have told me 2 years ago that science was going to be a controversial platform plank in your, I don't understand it, but it is what it is. As abortion, and thanks, Brian, for bringing up that hot button topic. I will just acknowledge that the hypocrisy is unbelievable. I was having a conversation with someone just yesterday, and they were talking about bodily autonomy, my body, my choice. And most, not all, but most anti-vaxxers are also pro-lifers. And it seems like it's my body, my choice when it comes to the vaccine, but it's your body, my choice when it comes to abortion, which, by the way, let's just clear up. Nobody likes abortion. It's so ridiculous. Somehow they paint us socially progressive people as, oh, you guys will just, oh, you love it. Nobody likes it. It's a last resort. It's healthcare is what it is. And it's proven to reduce unwanted, there's contraception, there's advice, there's counseling. So this notion that a bunch of white males will decide what women do with their body, just absolutely, I think it's deplorable.
Rick, your time is up. Thank you, Rick. And now you, Trevor.
So certainly the Liberal Party is fully in support of reproductive rights and reproductive health care. And I absolutely agree with that as a Liberal candidate. When it comes to choice over vaccines, I would like to point out that no one is actually forcing anybody to get vaccinated. It's certainly a choice. But what we are saying is that if you choose not to be vaccinated, then you cannot go into certain situations where you could affect many other people. You could affect our entire health system. And I think that phrase, my body, my choice, it's quite a logical fallacy as it applies to vaccination, because you're only talking about one aspect of choice there, right? You're talking about the choice to take a vaccine or not. But what about the choice of someone else who becomes infected and very sick with COVID? Do they have a choice whether COVID goes into their body, how COVID affects their body, what happens to them when they are in the ICU? What about the choice of someone who is vaccinated but gets into a car accident or has a heart attack and needs medical care? And because our health system is utterly swamped and overwhelmed, that person cannot have the care that they need. What about that person's choice? it's unavoidable that our choice when it comes to vaccines is going to affect other people's bodies and other people's health. And that's why it's so incredibly important that as many people as possible get fully vaccinated. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. And now you, Janine.
Thank you. Well, I believe that vaccines save lives. I think that the slogan, "My body, my choice," only applies to reproductive health care, and that really at the basis of a lot of concern about women having control over their reproductive health care is based in the misogyny that is still present, along with the systemic racism that our institutions have. We also have systemic misogyny, so that women need to have autonomy when it comes to healthcare, and we need to have open and available healthcare, which should be expanded to include dental care, pharma care, all of the preventatives that I believe a guaranteed annual income would present. I'm double vaccinated. I think I'm here and healthy because my mother chose to make sure that I was vaccinated against polio. I have friends who were crippled and negatively affected by the polio vaccine. I've had family members, young family members, a 32-year-old cousin's husband who died of COVID. And I think it's very irresponsible to not realize that our choices impact one another in the interconnected society that we live in at this point. Even though I'm speaking from a cabin in the woods on solar power, I know that my choices affect other people. And so I choose to be as responsible as possible in protecting others so that our healthcare system does not get overwhelmed. So that, as was mentioned earlier, people don't die of heart attacks in the waiting room, that they're able to get the healthcare that our system needs. And to that end, we really need to address caring for our nurses and our healthcare operators, that we need more funding. They need to be paid better. There shouldn't be any such thing as mandatory overtime. So that's all part of healthcare for women and healthcare for the greater society, where we're responsible.
Time is up. Thank you, Janine. Our next question: how do you or your party plan on enhancing the lives and providing more services for seniors who are living on their own and don't want to move to a care home or institutional living? For this one, we're going to start with you, Rick.
Whew, that's a good question. You know, both my parents, one of them was in assisted living, one of them was in a personal care home. I think, first of all, I know that Resthaven and Steinbach, for those of you that are not familiar with Steinbach, they've just expanded their facility or in the middle of it. I don't think it's quite taken place yet. So that's great. I know there's no shortage of healthcare beds for older people. I know my parents couldn't live together. My mom was able-bodied. My dad needed 24/7 care, and they weren't able to live together. I think that there's a real opportunity for the government, and I don't know how much this is federal or provincial, but of course they work together. And I hear this over and over again, to allow couples to live together where they don't have to walk outside to meet for lunch or walk to a different building. I think there needs to be a way to keep, and then more often than not, the spouse, be it the man or the woman, isn't able to drive, so they have to get their kids or their relatives to drive them to go visit them if they still want to live in their house. I think there should be a real focus on getting people where one of the spouses or one of the people is in a personal care home situation, where the other one, they can somehow live together on the same floor or down the hall from each other or something, and not so far apart, because I know that's a real pain in the butt for an older person to walk, especially during winter, to walk outside to just go have lunch with their spouse. So I think there's an opportunity there, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Rick. Now to you, Trevor.
I found it absolutely heartbreaking to watch when in Ontario and Quebec, we could see the devastating problems happening in care homes when COVID-19 was ripping through care homes. And then even more devastating to watch the province of Manitoba be woefully unprepared after we had decent advance warning. We'd seen what had happened in those other provinces, and our provincial Conservative government truly failed us on that one. If elected, federal Liberal government will train up to 50,000 new personal support workers and increase their wages to $25 per hour in order to attract and retain those workers. This will involve cooperation with the provinces and territories to make it happen, but I think it's what needs to happen. It's incredibly important. We will also double the home accessibility tax credit to up to $1,500 in order to help seniors be able to stay in their homes for longer. We would increase the guaranteed income supplement by $500 per year for single seniors and by $750 per year for senior couples. I think it's important to remember that our Liberal government restored the age of retirement to 65 after the Conservatives under Stephen Harper had raised it to 67. And one final point I'd like to make that I think is essential is a commitment to national universal pharmacare. Again, this wouldn't be easy. It would necessitate cooperation with the provinces, but I think it needs to happen.
Thank you, Trevor. Now you, Janine.
Thank you. Well, green policy does support investing in home and community care. One specific thing we'd like to do is the home renovation tax credit should be changed from $10,000 per household to $10,000 per person for more people to be able to age in place and make renovations to their homes to do that. We would provide a dedicated seniors care transfer to provinces and territories for specific improvements to their homes, community and long-term care facilities separate from the federal health transfer. We think we should shift long-term care policy towards aging in place by having the seniors care transfer include transformative investment in home and community care, such as naturally occurring retirement communities, co-housing models, enhanced home support programs, more cooperatives. I live on a cooperative farm where I'm planning to age in place here as others on our co-op are. We think we should end for-profit long-term care facilities and reorient long-term care towards community-based models, and make the caregiver tax credit a refundable tax credit so that family caregivers can have more flexibility from its current earned tax status. So just those are some of the basics, along with, as Trevor mentioned, the importance of pharmacare, dental care, and the guaranteed minimum income that will all support people aging healthfully in their homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. And now you, Noel.
Yeah, thank you. So the People's Party of Canada intends to change around a little bit how we're funding presently provincial healthcare. As we all know, currently there's health transfers from the federal government to the provinces. We'd like to see these cut and replaced with a GST transfer instead. So this would take the place where in effect the federal government would release control over GST points, and those would then go directly to the provinces. This would result in roughly a $220 million increase in additional revenue for the provinces, which they could invest as they wish in healthcare.
Thank you, Noel. Our next question. Do you feel Canada should have the capacity to produce its own vaccines, and should the Canadian federal government be in charge of and implement a national virus immunization policy and protocol which overrides the provinces? For this question, Trevor will start us off. Trevor?
I think our federal government has done very well to get us access to vaccines, and we had a very strong strategy of procuring different vaccines against COVID. We were able to do this ahead of schedule, and now everybody who wants a vaccine can get one. At this point, we have the vaccines. It's time to make sure that everybody gets vaccinated. I do think that continued funding for scientific research is incredibly important. And the Liberal Party certainly believes very strongly in continuing that sort of funding to continue supporting good science. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Janine?
Yes, the Green Party believes that we should invest in research and production of vaccines here in Canada and other therapeutics to improve Canada's ability to domestically source vaccines and other medical treatments. We'll commit to being guided by the recommendation of the relevant scientists and experts in formulating emergency response strategies for avoiding future pandemics. We also want to accelerate Canada's move towards a net zero emissions green economy in order to help further limit global warming and the intensification of extreme weather and climate events that such warming will provoke, because we do see a connection between the increase in pandemics and the increase in global warming. We think we should create an intergovernmental rapid response task force, that it's very important to work collegially between the provinces and the federal government, and to dedicate specific funding to strengthening the integration of public health with community-based primary care as the first access point of the healthcare system. We think we should lessen Canada's overall dependence on global supply chains for essential goods and services, strengthen the global public health intelligence network to flag potential public health concerns around the globe and as they start to impact Canadians and citizens here in Provencher. So we want to ensure that Canada has a robust capacity for pharmaceutical manufacturing. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Now you, Noel.
Yeah, thank you. The People's Party of Canada has no official policy with regard to domestic vaccine production. I would say we are supportive of private investment and ultimately would wish to encourage this in the Canadian market. It would ultimately provide some high-paying jobs. And certainly in the case of Provencher, we've seen what pharmaceutical manufacturers can provide in terms of employment. That'd be it. Back to you, Mr. Dewitt.
Thank you, Noel. And now you, Rick.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm pretty sure it'd be easy to figure out if it's in our best interest to produce our own vaccine, or financially, if it's better to just make sure we have some factory or some creator of a vaccine on call. I think that's a pretty easy one. I know in Winnipeg we have a very like a world-class viral lab here in Winnipeg. I'm sure they could help figure that out. But as far as the the federal government, I think to be honest, they're doing a pretty good job. What with the depending on who gets into power, but if you in the middle of October you have to be double vaxxed to fly. All the federally regulated industries have to be vaxxed. This includes feed mills, by the way, airlines, things like that. I think they're doing a good job. I don't think the federal government needs to go into the provinces and micromanage, because you have such a different situation in the Maritimes. You got PEI and some, that's a small province where there's no way it's a one-size-fits-all solution in there. So I think that you need to let the government decide. And even as we've seen provincially, we've seen different pockets have different, different rules. So I think there's a kind of a general oversight is good, but the provinces, I think, need to figure that out, because if the provinces don't do it properly, the governments of the day are going to pay for it. But there also needs to be some foresight. As Janine said, I think she alluded to it. Pandemics aren't going away. There's going to be another one. Let's have some people working on it. Let's have some discussions with, again, the people that create the vaccines, and see if it's in our best interest to have them on call, or whether we should do our own. But I think it's pretty easily solvable.
Rick, your time is up. Thank you, Rick. Our sixth question of the evening: do you feel there's a housing crisis in Canada? And if so, how would you address this situation? For this, we're going to start with Janine.
Thank you. Well, as I mentioned earlier, homelessness and housing is a priority for me. I helped to form our cooperative because I believe there should be more housing co-ops and more supports for affordable housing for all Canadians. I think our homelessness crisis is a great shame that could be easily avoided, as been demonstrated in other jurisdictions. So there needs to be more support for available housing. I think it's important that it be community appropriate, that communities have input. I think that's one of the strengths of the Green Party. We don't believe in top-down decision-making. We believe in collaborative decision-making. So as I've seen in some of the communities like La Broquerie and other areas, St. Pierre-Julie, where they're working together to house their community members in a healthier way, I think we do need more federal supports for housing initiatives to ensure that we have that will also support seniors staying in their housing. What I referenced earlier, supports for home renovations, supports for making our homes more energy efficient. There's a lot that the federal and the provincial governments can work on together to ensure that we address the housing needs in Provencher. I know there are young people that have found it very difficult to find housing, so we need to address that for all sectors of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Noel?
Yep. So there's a couple of policies that I'll touch upon that I think will certainly make a big difference in the lives of individuals both looking for housing and those noticing the increase in cost associated with buying and maintaining a home. So the first of which I'll highlight again is the People's Party of Canada is the only party to stand against the carbon tax. This ultimately is a tax on everything, from transportation to heating. So just in the last week or so with canvassing, I've spoken to multiple constituents who had kind of rising concerns with inflation. And ultimately, I think by cutting that carbon tax, we're going to see some improvement in that regard. In addition to that, I'd like to highlight our immigration platform, which is to bring Canada's total immigrant intake from approximately 450,000 down to about 100 to 150,000. So this will, among other things, reduce the amount of pressure in hotter housing markets, particularly if we're looking Vancouver, Montreal, the generally larger cities. With that reduced pressure on the housing markets, I think we can come to a space where finally wages will keep up, and ultimately you'll find a lot more young people finding housing a lot more accessible than they currently are.
Thank you, Noel. Rick, to you.
Yeah, hi. So, contrary to popular belief, there's not a shortage of housing in Canada at all. In fact, there's lots of housing. The problem is the interest rates are so low that people can borrow now to buy houses. So the lower the interest rates, the higher the house prices. And in fact, we have the slowest population growth recently since the First World War. So we're not growing that fast, but the prices are going through the roof. One reason is we're sort of the victim of our own success because people want to live in Canada. So we get a lot of people emigrating to Canada, and people want to live here, and there's family members, and there's often 2 or 3 families to a house, and they can afford it if they all have jobs. They can afford it, and so the price goes up. So it's not an easy fix. To be honest with you, I don't have the answer. To make the interest rates go up is not necessarily the right idea because you want young people to be able to afford the houses. So it's kind of a catch-22 on that front. So I wouldn't know the solution, but I know that the solution isn't building more houses. We need to somehow rein in costs. Oh, the other thing I want to say is that another reason is that the people who have houses, people of my age, that want to sell their houses, and they want to be able to make sure they sell it for an increased price from when they bought it. Of course, it'll go up. They want it to go up a lot so they can then afford to give their kids some money. And so politicians, and I'm not one, but maybe I will be one. Politicians want their constituents to be happy, so they want the prices of their houses to keep going up and up so they can provide for their kids. So again, kind of a victim of our own success.
Thank you, Rick. And finally, Trevor.
Yes, I think there is a serious problem with housing affordability in our country. We're aware of that. In the last term, our Liberal government launched the National Housing Strategy, funding the building of 63,000 units of affordable housing and repairing 126,000 units of existing housing. We also launched the Rapid Housing Initiative in 2020, which in its first round exceeded its initial target of creating 3,000 new affordable units. Going forward, we would like to institute an anti-flipping tax to hopefully help deal with these rapidly increasing house prices. We would like to double the first-time homebuyers tax credit. And we also want to institute a rent-to-own program to help out renters who would eventually like to own their own home. I'd just like to briefly address what Mr. Gautron alluded to with regard to inflation. The jump in inflation that we're seeing right now, it's something that's happening around the world. Price pressures have been building across the world as businesses have been gearing up again and have triggered bottlenecks for raw materials. This is something that's expected to be temporary. And this jump in inflation, it's coming mainly from the lower price levels that we had in 2020. Climate change is also involved. The cost of lumber increased dramatically due to the huge increase in demand, but then it was also affected by wildfires that were interfering with railway transport of lumber. So,
thank you, Trevor. Trevor, your time is up. Thank you. Our next question, how do you see immigration as a future source of labor to Canada and Provencher? And for this question, we're going to start with Noel.
Yeah, thankfully already touched upon it with the last question. We at the People's Party see it as an excellent opportunity to bring in skilled tradespeople, educated individuals. I would say specifically of note would be in the IT sector. I think our internet technology sector certainly is underdeveloped, and we can do well by prioritizing a lot of those highly skilled professionals. And ultimately, that could develop certain industries past what we currently have in the country. Back to you, Mr. Dewick.
Thank you, Noel. Rick, to you.
Yeah, immigration is so important, and there's seems to be a bit of a xenophobic mindset in Provencher, again in the areas that I have Steinbach landmark in our area and stuff. So there needs to be a different take on it, and I've said this before. So if you go into an apartment or a housing complex with a bunch of new Canadians, the response might be, oh, what's that smell? Where the response should be, what is that smell? I mean, there are spices there that I've never had and I want to try them, right? So there's just a whole mindset where immigrant, and of course, just so we're clear, we're all immigrants, or at least descendants of immigrants. So they just enrich our lives, and it just makes our I was talking to a cab driver the other day, and he was wearing a turban, and I asked him why he was wearing that color, and he says, oh, we can wear any color we want. I said, well, I'm a huge Minnesota Vikings fan. I said, can you wear a Vikings one? He goes, absolutely. He said, in fact, there are sports ones. So it's like, well, I didn't know that. I mean, there's just so much. That's just a bit of an anecdote, but we can learn so much from them and their cultures and embrace them, take the stuff we want and stick with the stuff that we like and stuff. So, I mean, it's so important to embrace them and to make them feel part of the community. And as Noel said, there's lots of jobs that, just speaking bluntly, that they do that a lot of people that have been here or have grown up here all their lives don't want to do, and they do them happily because they can't believe they have the opportunity to make money in this great country. So I think it's great.
Thank you, Rick. To you, Trevor.
Yes, I agree that immigration is incredibly important to our country. I think it's important to note a strong contrast here between Maxime Bernier and the PPC and the Liberal Party on this one. Maxime Bernier has said that he wants to reduce immigration dramatically, reduce our welcoming of refugees dramatically. The Liberal Party has committed to accepting 20,000 Afghan refugees to help deal with that ongoing crisis. Previously, our party has already started the modernization of our immigration system with some paper-based programs going digital this past year, just to streamline the immigration process a little more. I think that's work that needs to continue. We also implemented the agri-food pilot program, which is a pathway to permanent residency for agri-food workers. And again, I fully support that program. I think it's really important. And just more generally speaking, I feel international cooperation and Canada having a respected place on the world stage is critical. We need each other. We need to cooperate with other countries. Here in Manitoba, we have had firefighters helping us out from South Africa. And it really bothers me when I hear people complaining about a comparatively very small amount of money that our country spends on foreign aid when we also receive help from other parts of the world, and that cooperation is very much needed. I think that needs to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. And finally, Janine.
Thank you. Well, I'm afraid that hate has been on the rise in Canada. The Green Party feels that we really need to address systemic racism and discrimination in our immigration and refugee services. So a Green government will update the Citizenship Guidebook to reflect the more accurate history of Canada and Turtle Island that includes the harms of residential schools and the Indian Act. We think we should address all forms of hate and xenophobia in all aspects of settlement in Canada. So including temporary visa liberalization, issuing of temporary permits for study, work, visit, and family reunification, including increasing capacity for family sponsorship and revision of adoption processes. We also think we should terminate the Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States. The Canadian Federal Court recently ruled the Safe Third Country Agreement violates the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The agreement allows Canada to send refugee claimants back even when they could face deportation to their country of origin. So this agreement must be terminated. We would like to revise Canada Border Services Agency practices as well, including operation of immigration detention centers, family separation, and developing an oversight mechanism, including a civilian complaint and review commission. And that these will all help us eliminate discrimination based upon identity, which has increased in recent years. So we just think that this is an important act to take. Canada is a country of immigrants, and we need to welcome those who wish to live here. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Our next question, the 8th of the evening. What is the best way to support Manitoba agriculture in the grain and livestock sectors? And for this one, we'll start with you, Rick.
Let me unmute my mic there. Wow, you kind of got me off guard with this one. I mean, I'm right in the heart of it. In fact, my oldest foster son, he's 20. He has a 35-acre field. He had wheat this year. He did okay. Got no rain, but he managed to get about 45, 50 bushels to the acre. You know, I think that what I noticed more than anything is that, in fact, I golfed with a friend of mine, a cousin and a friend of mine the other day, and they're moving away and none of their kids want to take over the family farm. And the price of land has gotten so expensive that what you're seeing is huge corporate farms versus family farms. You know, 1,000, 1,600 acres used to be a bit of a big deal. And I could use hectares, but I'm too old to know what hectare means, so I'm using acres. And now you've got farms with 10,000 acres, and if there's land available, the big guys just buy it up. And I'm talking about grain now. If you want to talk about, we've got a neighbor that's got a $36 million quota. He's got, I'm going to say 1,800, dairy cows, and they're just buying. They're buying the small guy out. There should be a way for the federal government to not get too intrusive, because that's a huge mistake that they make all the time, the federal government, but to help the family farms try to stay family farms and try to support the people that have 600, 800, 1,000 acres, maybe 200 pigs or 80, dairy cows or whatever the quota is, because sometimes it's really hard for the family farm to stay in business. So I'd like to see a little bit more focus on that.
Thank you, Rick. To you, Trevor.
I touched on some of this a little bit before when we talked about climate change. No farmer at this point can ignore climate change. One thing that I would like to add is I think it's helpful to actually look at what some Green Party folks are saying about the Liberal climate plan. Andrew Weaver, the former leader of the Green Party of BC, had this to say about the Liberal Party climate plan. It is the only credible plan put forward by any party at the federal level. We are at a critical time. We cannot afford to move backwards on climate change. So in terms of what we are already doing, the programs that we want to build on, we have the Agricultural Climate Solutions Program. That includes direct funding support for farmers to implement some of the better management practices, like making good use of cover crops, planting and maintaining shelter belts, having better nitrogen management, all that sort of thing can help our farmers to make it through some of the climate extremes that we're seeing right now, such as drought and flooding. I've found it absolutely heartbreaking this season myself. I live on a small farm. I had to start feeding hay to my livestock in July, which is bizarre. That is not normal. And I've just been so saddened to read all the many posts from livestock producers having to sell off the cattle, the genetics that they have built up over many years. It's been devastating.
Thank you, Trevor. Janine?
Thank you. Agriculture and the food sector is an engine of not only the Canadian economy, but also here in Provencher, and is also responsible for 1/3 of the greenhouse gases emitted. So they're so vulnerable to environmental and economic risks. So they receive significant support from the Canadian government. In 2020, it totaled over $7 billion. So this is a powerful tool of subsidy that can be used to scale and determine which food systems prosper and which decline. So what we need to do is support climate change mitigation and adaptation in farming, the changes that contribute to reducing emissions and retaining more carbon in the soil, regenerative organic practices like cover crops that were mentioned, polycropping, diversified landscapes, moving away from intensive livestock operations to more integrated operations, land-based operations, also improve adaptation by improving resilience in the face of drought, pests, diseases, and other climate-related threats that our farming community is dealing with. So we need to invest in science and the infrastructure and business development that supports the transition from fossil fuel-based agriculture to electric-based agriculture that works with nature and not against it. We need to work with the provinces to fund this research and development and develop environmental farm plans that help farmers protect wildlife habitat areas and maintain water quality in streams and lakes and aquifers. We think we should establish climate change emission targets for all components of the food system, including nitrogen fertilizer use, livestock production and transportation, and food procurement in federal institutions. We really think we should reestablish the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Administration to support adaptation in drought conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janine. And finally, Noel.
Yep. So the People's Party of Canada has no dedicated ag plan per se. We do not plan to modify, add, or remove any subsidy programs currently in place for either grain or cattle farmers. I'll take this moment just to touch upon our supply management plan. Ultimately, we would like to see the removal of supply management as a system currently in place in Canada. As such, what we're looking at doing is reimbursing both dairy, poultry, and egg farmers for their quota. So this would be a direct cash equivalent to whatever that equity is worth in their quota. As such, and with the fiscal situation of our nation after the last 18 months, we'll probably be waiting somewhere between 8 and 12 years if we form government to remove the supply management system, as it will be quite costly to remove. But ultimately, it's a policy we feel will be good in the long term, both for the farmers and for the countries. We think there's a great opportunity to increase exports to other nations. Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Duick.
Thank you, Noel. Our next question, given the federal deficit has reached $1 trillion, do you see this as a cause for concern? How will it impact our Canadian economy and taxation on business? And we're going to start with Trevor.
I think that the programs that we've had to support individuals, families, and businesses throughout the pandemic have been absolutely necessary. Many of us would not have made it through. Businesses would have gone under if we hadn't had these programs. This has been the time that we absolutely needed to spend that money. So I'm not so concerned at this point about the spending that we've had during the pandemic. There really was absolutely no other choice. Since 2015, the Liberal Party has increased taxes on the top 1% of earners. We want to continue to make our tax system more fair. We closed loopholes used by wealthy individuals and companies, such as the stock option deduction. Going forward, we intend to raise income taxes on the big banks that earn more than $1 billion per year. As I mentioned before, we would like to institute an anti-flipping tax. We will also eliminate flow-through shares for oil, gas, and coal projects. And we believe that there should be a minimum tax rule for the highest tax bracket earners so that it is impossible for the very most wealthy people to manage to pay zero taxes through excessive deductions and credits. Going forward, I think that continued support to grow our economy coming out of this pandemic is incredibly critical. Now is not the time to have cuts to essential services and programs.
Thank you, Trevor. Janine?
Thank you. I believe what we need to cut is the billions and billions of dollars that we pay to subsidize oil and gas extraction. It's just criminal in this day and age. The knowledge is there. The scientific reports are there that we need to switch away and put that investment into things like our rural municipalities. Green governments would support the use of changes to the infrastructure of the Canada Infrastructure Bank to reduce interest rates to municipalities on loans for infrastructure projects. I agree with what was said earlier, that it is a time to invest in Canadians and communities of Canadians rather than in the extractive industrial capitalist model, which we're seeing is taking us to the brink of disaster. So we need to make the changes that Canadians need, institutionalizing federal transfers to municipalities through the creation of a municipal fund, renaming the gas tax funds, which were delinked from gas tax revenue years ago, and retaining the same eligibility as the gas tax funds. We would like to see ensuring a permanent doubling of current funding to ensure predictable and reliable funding to municipalities. We'd like to allocate a 1% of GST to housing and other municipal infrastructures on an ongoing basis to provide a consistent baseline of funding to our municipalities. And answer the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and Vancouver Mayor's Council call for a permanent dedicated federal public transport that works both on electric-based system that works both in our rural areas as well as in our urban areas. So it is a time for investment. It's a time in a transition to a just society and life with dignity through investing in green initiatives. that will generate more jobs and that will help us have a healthy green future. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Noel, to you.
Thank you. The People's Party of Canada would like to see both the deficit and also the debt tackled within the next 3 years. If we form government, we would do so by defunding the CBC, cutting foreign aid spending, cutting corporate subsidies, and ultimately other subsidy programs of that nature.
Thank you, Noel. And finally, you, Rick.
Yeah, a recent poll, I just read it today or yesterday. People generally don't care that much about deficits. What they do, they don't compute. When it gets into the hundreds of billions and trillions, we sort of lose the focus because it's so much money. It's like, whatever. We can't even comprehend how much money that is. I think reining in, first of all, we definitely need to tax the super rich. I'm not talking about the rich. We need to tax the super rich a little more. And by the way, nobody in Canada, I think Janine pointed out to it, the oil companies and stuff, nobody's bailing, nobody's leaving Canada. They're all staying here. So if they have to pay another 1% in tax, it's not a big deal. And by the way, the reason that they don't is because all the politicians in Ottawa all have stocks in these companies, right? Because it's in their portfolios. And by the way, I do too. I have stocks in Suncor. Hasn't done very well lately. That's a whole other story. So they want them to do well because that's in the Teacher Society and the Ontario Teacher Society. They all have stocks in these big companies and the big banks, the 5 big banks. So they want them to do well, and that's fair enough. But if they took a percentage and help with our deficit, I don't think anyone would mind. I think, again, the portfolios of the individual politicians might be bothered. But other than that, I don't think it's a big deal. And again, it goes back to what I said before. People don't mind paying taxes as long as the money goes to, it doesn't go to waste. And we all know, we all have firsthand knowledge of government programs that are complete waste of money. I know it's not going to knock down the hundreds of billions of dollars that the Liberal government has got us into. And I do agree with Trevor, by the way, that the CERB was the way to go. I think maybe there was a little bit too much, but certainly we survived the pandemic more than anyone else.
Thank you, Rick. Our next question, how do you see Canada overcoming the market monopoly and product shortages as a result of our dependence on China as a supplier of cheaper manufactured goods? We're going to start with you, Janine.
Thank you. Well, green policies really support local development, local production, looking at what the strengths are of various areas in conjunction with their ecosystems and their bioregions to see how we can maximize working with nature to ensure that we have the jobs and the contributions that we can make for a satisfied, a life with dignity in our communities and in Canada. So if we continue to focus on what the strengths are of an area and develop local councils that can make the decisions on these are our strengths, these are the challenges we have to deal with, that localized decision making we think is very important to dealing with the stresses and the challenges of life in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Noel?
So I might be sounding like a broken record at this point. Reduced taxation eventually when the economy can afford it, and ultimately deregulation to bring some of those production facilities back onto Canadian soil. This would also be in terms of seeking out trade agreements and facilitate trading arrangements with different countries. I would say probably most notably it'd be India, as that is I'd say increasingly looking like a very good market for us to be trying to get into. And ultimately, I'd reinforce that, getting it so that it's financially viable to do business in Canada, because as of right now, a lot of business owners are not too tempted to do much investment in our country.
Thank you, Noel. To you, Rick.
Yeah, thanks. You know, there's a saying that if you got a good deal at Walmart, someone somewhere was exploited. And, you know, it's so true. But I think this goes back to what I was saying before about climate change and how we sort of teach people. I think, you know, I know lots of people that if there's a local manufacturer and they're making a really quality product, a real quality product, people will buy it, right? Never mind that it's a quality product and it might cost a little more, but just for warranty and stuff, you have, you know, you can, that person's in Canada, you can access them, you can phone them, you can find out if it's covered and whatever. So you get better customer service. But as long, you know, but again, you know, those are people that are in the same sort of social status that I'm in. And I understand why people need to go to Walmart and get stuff for really cheap. And I don't, you know, and a little bit, I hate to admit it, but a little bit Noel was saying, I think that, you know, there needs to be a little bit more incentive for the manufacturers in Canada, or either in financial incentive to help them. Again, we talked about this about the question about entrepreneurs. There needs to be more incentive for people to start up and for small businesses to create stuff, and then help the government can help them market it, produce it, or whatever. And but you know what, that's a real tough one, because there are always going to be people that only have a $200 a month budget and can't afford a $250 or even a $220 budget. And so that's, you know, that's a tough one.
Thank you, Rick. And finally, Trevor.
Trade diversification is incredibly important, and it is something that we are already doing. Under Liberal leadership, Canada became the only G7 country to have free trade agreements with all other G7 countries. We need to continue taking advantage of the agreements that we've made. And to that end, a re-elected Liberal government will establish a new federal hub to help Canadian businesses and entrepreneurs take full advantage of the opportunities created by CUSMA, CETA, CPTPP, and other trade agreements. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Well, we've made it through 10 questions already, a lot of quality answers this evening. We've got 2 questions to go. Our next question is, how is the best way to support free enterprise in Canada? We'll start with you, Noel.
Once again, broken record. Deregulation where possible, and ultimately lower taxation. Ultimately, I figure the biggest hindrance to business and entrepreneurs is ultimately government. To a large degree, these are the structures that have prevented multiple different business types from flourishing in both in our province and then elsewhere in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. Rick?
Yeah, I don't know how this is different than the entrepreneur question, so I'll maybe give that same answer. I think there's lots of opportunity for the government to encourage people to start businesses and free enterprise. Again, there's people on the ground in every community that know what's going on. They know who the movers and shakers are. They know who the kids are in school that are coming up with great ideas. And I think they need to be involved. I don't even know. I was just thinking the other day whether it's getting these people on the ground, giving them a $500 a month stipend to sort of liaise with the communities or whatever. And going back to, I think what we touched on before, with agriculture and the markets and stuff and the free enterprise, and we have egg quotas and we have milk quotas and we have all these different quotas. They seem to be working. I know in the States, you see them on the news dumping, hundreds of millions of liters of milk, I guess gallons in the States of milk. And we don't generally have that because of our supply and demand. So I think that's pretty good. But yeah, absolutely, there needs to be there need to be people in the community that can see who needs to be helped along with some free enterprise. And I think the government, sometimes the federal government specifically, is this distant entity that nobody really can relate to. And if they would have these people in the community that could sort of put a face to a government, I think that would help greatly.
Thank you, Rick. To you, Trevor.
So like Rick has mentioned, there are indeed many programs to help businesses and entrepreneurs across the country. I'll take this opportunity to highlight a few of them, and especially as they relate to climate change and the environment, because I think sometimes people seem to have the impression that the economy and the environment are opposing forces, but really they can go hand in hand. So one good example is the Green Homes Grant program that our Liberal government established. This is a grant that's available for homeowners for up to $5,000, and the money can be used to make homes more energy efficient in all sorts of different ways. So that can be insulation, it can be new doors and windows, solar panels. And when you think about that, that's a whole lot of new jobs, right? And that's growing our economy in a way that is also protecting our environment and addressing climate change. We also have the Agricultural Clean Technology Program, and that again allows farmers to access support for things like solar panels, more efficient grain dryers, and once again, that is creating jobs and stimulating the economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. And finally, Janine.
Thank you. The Green Party believes that innovation is the engine to economic growth. It allows Canada to remain competitive in a rapidly evolving global technological landscape. Canadian universities routinely rank among the top in the world, and our research laboratories are world-renowned. So I will refer to what was spoken about earlier about abolishing post-secondary education tuition and canceling all federally held student loan debt. Right now, the average graduate carries $28,000 worth of debt. So getting away from that will really help Canada, them invest in their entrepreneurial futures and develop a business here at home. Canadian investment in research and development has been declining for years, and at 1.7% of our GDP is among the lowest in the OECD. Despite being the country that discovered insulin in 1921, when the pandemic broke, Canada had zero capacity to manufacture our vaccines. So this must change. There must be massive opportunities for the countries to develop breakthrough solutions to combat climate change. Nearly $150 billion was invested globally last year in solar installations alone. Emerging ocean technologies, clean technologies rather, could soon reach the same scale. A green revolution is coming, and Canada has the opportunity to be at the forefront. Along the way, we can create good jobs and be a global leader in the innovation needed to combat climate change. But we must be bold and we must act now. Whether in the forefront of quantum computing, clean technology, next generation medicine, or artificial intelligence, the federal government has a crucial role to play in de-risking emergent disruptive technologies so that they may scale it, must invest in scientific research and development.
Thank you so much, Janine. Our final question of the night is prepared by the Steinbach Chamber of Commerce. How do you see the future of Canada and its ability to function as a sovereign nation, given the ongoing issues of Quebec separation, Alberta's independence, and Indigenous demands for autonomy? Can Canada continue to exist, or will the demands from the various factions within Canada cause the country to break apart? And Rick, we'll start with you for this final question.
Yeah, thanks. You know what? I think it was Mayor Jean Drapeau back in -- when the Montreal hosted the Olympics and they built the new stadium, and he said and I'm paraphrasing here, said the Montreal Olympic Committee will no more sooner have a debt than a man will give birth to a baby. And of course, I think I believe they're still paying off the debt for those Olympics. And the analogy there is that, someone had said to me a long time ago, I read somewhere, that Quebec is like the woman that keeps threatening to have the baby but never actually has it. I mean, Quebec is going to threaten. They don't really want to secede. I mean, well, we got close in 95, I guess. Fair enough, we got close. Although I don't know how that would look. You talk to most Albertans. I mean, different. Look what happened in Europe with the euro, and then now people are going back to their own currency and stuff. It was a complete mess. I don't believe that Quebec wants to secede. Really, I just think they want more stuff from the federal government. I don't think Alberta wants to secede. I think they just want, maybe start charging an income tax, a provincial income tax. That might be an idea. Going forward, I think Canada's fine. The federal government has to sort of put out the fires and go along. I think they're doing a pretty good job of neutralizing the people's, that are screaming secession or whatever. I'm not too concerned about it, because if you actually, I wouldn't mind seeing a federal government actually calling their bluff and see what happens, but I don't think we'll ever get to that.
Thank you, Rick. Trevor, to you.
I'm glad to hear the topic of Indigenous reconciliation come up, and First Nations. I was starting to worry that we wouldn't have a question on that this evening, and I think it's very important. The Liberal Party is absolutely committed to continuing to further reconciliation and continuing to partner with First Nations. Our government did lift 109 long-term boil water advisories since 2015. There are 51 more to go. We will lift them all, investing whatever it takes to get that done. I think sometimes Jagmeet Singh and the NDP tend to make some of these issues out as if they could be solved with a snap of one's fingers in a split second, and some of it isn't so easy. But our government has been doing the hard work that needs to be done, and we will continue. It's also incredibly important in federal government relations with Indigenous peoples that solutions to some of these problems should be Indigenous led. Sometimes they will take a lot of time. But I think we're moving in the right direction. We will continue to support communities that want to have their own jurisdiction over child and family services. We will invest in Aboriginal Head Start in urban and northern communities. We will continue to fully fund Jordan's Principle and the Inuit Child First Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Janine?
Thank you. We believe that Canada can lead the way in the Green Party because in the past we were considered a place of diversity and inclusivity, and we believe that it's up to us as Canadians to make true this promise of a just society, and that if we address a just society for all Canadians, including First Nations, including those in Quebec, including those in Alberta, where they feel disenfranchised or cut off, through cultural revitalization and healing, we can develop unity and develop communities where we can work together constructively. So the Green Party calls for the implementation of all 94 of the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We think we should implement all of the calls for justice from the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. We think we should build community capacity to support exercising self-determination. And that self-determination would apply to all regions of Canada, not just our First Nations. Support self-determination with effective, fully funded organizations to represent and provide services to communities by expanding basic organizational capacity funding for organizations. We think it's very important to ensure access to quality education for all. As I spoke to earlier, the importance of having a well-educated population, including appropriate cultural education. So ensuring that every First Nations, Métis, and Inuit child has access to quality educational opportunities based on the expressed political and social priorities of that First Nation. So if we think we support this kind of post-secondary education across the country, it will bond us as Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. And Noel, to you.
Thank you. I do think we're going to increasingly have issues with terms of separation, just how a lot of the political climate has gone. Ultimately, I think it can be resolved quite easily, and I don't think whether it be Quebecers or Albertans for that matter, are ready to throw the towel in quite yet. To a larger degree, I think we need to see a massive decentralization from the federal government to the provinces. I think it's become increasingly obvious that each province has a distinct culture and ultimately should be respected as such. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel, and thank you all for your answers this evening. We are now to the point in the evening of closing statements. Each candidate will be allowed a maximum of 3 minutes. We'll be using the reverse order that we use from opening statements, which means, Noel, we'll start with you.
Excellent, thank you. So I guess there's 2 main points I'd like to address. First off, kind of being the fact that the People's Party of Canada is your only Conservative option in this election. The federal Conservatives will not do nothing about the carbon tax. They will do nothing on Justin Trudeau's order in council with regard to firearms. The federal Conservatives will not balance the books within the first term. These are all issues that I know constituents of Provencher care about very deeply, and as such, I'd like to highlight the fact that the People's Party of Canada is willing to work on these issues. In addition, the People's Party of Canada is the only party that is opposed to vaccine mandates, vaccine passports, the lockdowns, and ultimately will be the only party to push provinces to guarantee your charter rights and freedoms. I can't stress this enough. This is probably one of the most important elections of our lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. Janine?
Thank you very much. The Green Party says climate change is here. It's already impacting our communities, and we need you to help us implement the resilient measures to keep our communities safe. You know, nearly 600 people died of sudden death with the extreme heat in BC in just 1 week this summer. We felt it here and the drastic impact on our crops and our pastures. So what we need to do is people in Canada are experiencing this firsthand, and we need to address the warming planet in real time. So we've given an alarm bell to act on climate change through the August 2021 report of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It was the latest and most explicit warning that the role of human activity in climate change and about the role of human activity in climate change and its impact on the planet. The UN Secretary General has described it as code red for humanity. So our human activity is both the cause and the solution. We're able to make the changes if we think creatively, if we work together, if we have a collegial rather than a combative approach where we look to loving kindness and our humanity in solving our problems together. Our actions have caused global warming, but our actions together, we can limit it and ensure that there's a healthy future for our children by ensuring that we hold global warming to 1.5 degrees C. The global average temperature is against pre-industrial levels. So it's very important that we all do our bit in making the choices that we need to make to keep our communities and our country and our world healthy. And reclaim some of that health. So in this federal election, I ask you to once again think green and vote Janine, and visit me at greenpartyprovencher.ca. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janine. Trevor, your closing comments.
I think we have to mention the fact that Provencher's Conservative incumbent, Ted Falk, is not here tonight. I think that this has been a theme for Mr. Falk over the last little while. I've heard from voters who have been very frustrated over his lack of clarity, that he's not willing to answer questions often from voters. He hasn't been willing to say whether or not he's been vaccinated. He also will not disclose if he's been taking daily rapid COVID tests, which is according to Erin O'Toole, the Conservative Party leader, that's supposed to be a requirement of Conservative candidates. They must either be fully vaccinated or taking daily rapid COVID tests. And in Ted Falk's case, we don't know anything about what he's doing. I think that voters want clarity, and they're not getting it from the Conservative Party leader or the candidate in Provencher. There's been a lot of confusion from Mr. O'Toole. He has, in the last couple of weeks, changed his position on gun control, first saying that he would do away with recent Liberal measures that were introduced, and now saying that he won't. Just a couple of years ago, the Conservatives were very opposed to the carbon tax, and now they have carbon pricing in their platform. Mr. O'Toole has allowed his candidate in this riding to spread misinformation about vaccination, while at the same time claiming that he will somehow convince over 90% of Canadians to get vaccinated. Yet he can't persuade his own Conservative candidates to disclose their vaccination status. I believe that Mr. Falk has been, when he's been speaking, he's been saying what he thinks voters want to hear, but also walking a fine line of trying not to anger the Conservative Party at the national level. And this is one thing that I actually appreciate about Mr. Gautron is that he's very clear about what he believes in and where he stands. And I've heard from a lot of undecided voters at the doors that I think they're trying to figure things out, and they're seeking information. And to everyone who has sent me questions, who has had discussions with me at the doors, I just want to thank you all so much for considering all the information, for your willingness to engage. I actually really love door knocking. I love having those conversations. I am ready to represent Provencher in Ottawa. I believe that change is possible. I believe that Provencher is ready for a progressive voice. Thank you for considering.
Thank you, Trevor. And finally, you, Rick.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, get vaccinated, please. It's science. It's like gravity. It's like high pressure to low pressure. It's like the Bernoulli principle. It's just science. It's not anything revolutionary. It's just science. I like the saying that says, it doesn't matter if you believe it or not, it's true. So there you go. And for what Trevor was saying about Ted Falk not being here, it speaks volumes that he can't even defend his own ideologies. I mean, imagine you being an incumbent leader of the Conservative Party, and I don't want to pile on him, but you're the incumbent and you can't even defend your policies. I mean, one hopes that maybe he couldn't be here because he's getting vaccinated, or maybe he's designing the float for the Pride Parade. I'm not sure, but he's not here, and that is just a dereliction of leadership, I think. And I don't think we've touched on LGBTQ things, which is really important to me. I think that, and I was saying it earlier, I think that there's LGBTQ plus, and there's two-spirited, and there's a whole bunch of other letters, and I don't mean to minimize that. The point is that there's so much, the reason there's so many letters is that there's so much representation. It would be, I think it's almost embarrassing that we need to have the LGBTQ community. They're just people. Why do they need to advocate for themselves is beyond me. Who cares? Who cares what they do and who they love? They're just people. So if we can get past that, that would be really cool. And then the Indigenous issues, as I mentioned before a couple of times, I have two foster kids. I didn't get to touch it on the last question. And they're both Ojibwe, and Trevor and I have that in common. He has Ojibwe horses and I have Ojibwe kids. And I think we agreed they're all vaccinated. So that's good. So I think that we need to make the Indigenous community accountable. They want to be accountable. I know Trevor talked about, the money that the Liberals are throwing at them. That's the start. First of all, I don't know if you know this, that their education, their students get half the money that non-reservation kids get. That has to be rectified. But it's not just about throwing money at them. It's about also making them accountable, and they want to be accountable. But I think the governments, right from liberal to conservative, haven't really wanted them to be accountable because they like throwing money and then they want to make them go away. And I think that's a real problem too. So I think that's kind of it. And I'll just end with get vaccinated, please.
Thank you, Rick. And thank you to the four of you for taking part today and for providing such quality answers. Wayne, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Shannon, for moderating and facilitating our discussion this evening. I very much appreciate it. And thank you also to the team at Golden West for making this event possible. I would also like to thank our candidates once again for taking the time to allow us to get to know you, get to know your party and your platforms a little bit. That's very much appreciated. And I wish each one of you all the best in the final days of the campaign. And thanks again for being willing to enter into public service on our behalf. It's an important job and it's an important role, and very grateful for your willingness to do so. Thank you as well to our community for submitting the questions for our candidates. Some really great, some really tough questions in some cases, and I really appreciate your honesty in wanting to hear from our candidates on these topics. So once again, thank you very much for your time, and I wish all of you a great couple days of the campaign and a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here.